Daenerys' A Dance with Dragons storyline is disliked by a large portion of the fandom. Many accuse it of being a drawn-out filler, a big build-up to something that does not happen. The supporting cast comes across as one-dimensional cartoon villains, there are no epic battles, only boring governance among an endless pile of problems. As such, where there appeared a detailed analysis of that storyline, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, someone delved into this, so that we don't have to. Untangling the Meereenese Blot by Adam Feldman appeared in 2023, and ever since, it was considered the golden standard when it comes to the analysis of that storyline, with few people ever challenging it. I decided to try and do precisely that. Before we proceed with the video, I need to explain something. In order to discuss these essays, I need to cite large chunks of its contents. I believe that they are Adam Feldman's intellectual property, and as such, I contacted him at the beginning of August to ask whether I can use its contents in my video. I still received no response and feel like at this point there won't be any. I am not taking any risk and therefore, rather than continue waiting for something that might not come, I decided to modify the script. Before you watch this video, you must read these essays to understand what I'm talking about. When discussing a certain paragraph or an excerpt, I will try to paraphrase it and say exactly which excerpts I cite. And preferably, you should have these essays in a separate browser tab to be able to switch and reread those excerpts to make sure you understand the points I'm making. I'm afraid there is no other way to go about it, and it's not the kind of video you can listen to while doing household chores. Before we start, remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. Meereen's storyline is incredibly complex, hence a short refresher is in order. If you don't need it, you can skip this segment. Meereen is the third slave city that Daenerys conquers. After learning that Astapor fell into chaos following her departure, Dany decides that she will not abandon Meereen to the same fate, and decides to rule it until she stabilizes the situation enough to leave for Westeros. Ever since she took the city, her freedmen are getting slaughtered at night by a shady resistance group referred to as the Sons of the Harpy. Recently the Sons got bolder though. They went as far as to kill an unsullied soldier, Stalwart Shield. We are introduced to some of the players in this arc. Reznak Moreznak is a Meereenese seneschal serving in her council. Skahaz kandaq is the most prominent Shavepate, those who embraced Dany's rule and shaved their heads to symbolize abandoning Meereen's old ways. And of course, hizdahr loraq, a Meereenese merchant, who urges Dany to reopen the fighting pits of Meereen. By the end of the chapter, Dany learns that Drogon killed the child, Hazea. Several more unsullied get killed, including Missandei's brother, Mosador. Since the only witnesses to these acts were the wine seller and his daughters, Dany orders sharply questioning them to get any information about who was responsible. She also decides to take a noble child from each pyramid, with an unsaid threat that they shall be harmed if any more attacks come. Dany also imprisons Viserion and Rhaegal, but Drogon escapes. Dany is visited by her old frenemy from Karth, Xarox Van Daxos. He tries to convince her that slavery is a natural state of things and that she should leave. Yunkai plans to go to war against Meereen and Myr. Volantis, Tolos and Mantares are getting involved as well. Xaro notes that Dany's dragons are notably absent, confirming that Dany is unwilling to use them in war. Xaro tries to persuade her to abandon her cause and brings ships with him that could take her to Westeros. Following the chaos of Dany's departure, Astapor is ruled by the Butcher King Cleon, and Dany is unwilling to send any support to him, much to Astapor's despair. When Dany refuses to leave Meereen, Karth declares war on her and blockades the city through the river. We meet another important player in Dany's story, Galazza Galare, the Green Grace, a religious leader of the Giscari. The Shadow War claims another victims, the weavers who made a tapestry for Dany. It's worth noting that the weavers were taught their skill by a slave who once belonged to a man named Grasdan, who is the Green Grace's cousin and whose calls for compensation were declined. Dany, however, did not retaliate on the innocent hostages, though the Shavepate, urge her to do so. The Green Grace suggests Dany marries Hizdahr, the nobleman who is so insistent on opening the fighting pits, believing that this will help her stabilize the situation in the city, given his connections and influence. It's also mentioned that the Kandaqs, the family Skahaz hails from, and the loraqs, the family Hizdahr hails from, have a blood feud. That Skahaz is of far lesser standing than Hizdahr, and that they hate each other. Dany and Hizdahr strike a deal. If Hizdahr manages to stop the killings for 90 days and negotiates peace with Yunkai, they will marry. Daario Naharis, Dany's crush, returns to Meereen and like Skahaz, he urges Dany to take a more violent course of action, suggesting something like a Meereenese red wedding. Dany declines and dismisses him. 64 days pass without a single murder, though some Meereenese ships have joined Karv's blockade. An envoy from Astapor informs Dany that a plague erupted in the city and that the refugees come to Meereen. Yunkai prepares to siege Meereen and Dany decides that marrying Hizdahr is the only way for Meereen to be able to face the foe. Dany visits the refugee camp and tends to the sick herself. After returning, Reznak suggests reopening the fighting pits as a part of the wedding deals, and Dany says that Hizdahr can do that. Hizdahr manages to broker a peace between Yunkai, but the condition is that Dany allows the slave trade to continue in Astapor and Yunkai. Brown Van Plum betrays Dany and she finally gives in to her desire for Daario. The Dornish men make it to Meereen. Quentyn Martell informs Dany of the secret marriage pact that was signed between Oberyn and Sir Willem Darry, with the Sea Lord of Braavos as a witness. According to this pact, Aryan was to marry Viserys, and with Dorne's support, he would reclaim the Iron Throne. However, now that Viserys is dead, the pact can be fulfilled by the marriage of Quentyn, Aryan's younger brother, and Daenerys herself. Dany is forced to refuse this pact, since she already agreed to marry Hizdahr, and the chapter ends with their wedding. The Yunkai arrive in Meereen to celebrate the peace and reopening of the fighting pits, openly taunting Dany with their slaves, even trading in them within sight of Dany's walls. Skahaz was removed from Dany's council on Hizdahr's orders, and Brown Van Plum, who is present during the celebrations, explains why he defected. He believes Dany's cause to be lost. Dany decides to show her dragons to Quentyn and warns him that Meereen is not a safe place for him. Dany and Hizdahr attend the games in Meereen to celebrate the opening of the fighting pits. Everyone seems to be excited, aside from Dany and Missandei. When they arrive at the pits, Hizdahr urges Dany to eat honeyed locusts, but she declines. Instead, strong Belvas eats them all. After some real fights, a folly is scheduled. Tyrion Lannister and Penny are supposed to joust on a pig and a dog. Hizdahr informs Dany that they want to unleash real lions into the pit, but Dany forbids this. When Barsena Blackhair is killed by a boar, Dany takes off her tokar and intends to leave, while Belvas suddenly gets very sick. This is when Drogon appears in the pit. When he goes on a rampage, Hizdahr orders to kill him, but Dany runs towards her dragon to save him. She tames him using only a whip and flies away. After Dany leaves the city, Hizdahr rules in her place as a consort. Most believe Dany to be dead. Skahaz convinces Barristan that Hizdahr poisoned the locust to kill Daenerys, and Barristan removes Hizdahr from power and imprisons him. The Harpies killings immediately restart. Quentyn tries to tame Dany's dragons but gets burned, and the previously imprisoned dragons are set free. Barristan becomes the regent of Meereen as Dany's hand after Hizdahr has been imprisoned. The peace gets broken. Yunkish catapults send corpses into Meereen so that the city gets infected with the plague. Meanwhile, Dany gets lost on the Dothraki Sea. She wants to return to Meereen, but can't convince Drogon to fly there, so she walks by foot. She gets seriously sick and experiences hallucinations, deciding that dragons plant no trees and that she ought to deal with Meereen with fire and blood, and leave for Westeros. Khal Draco's Khalasar finds her next to her dragon. Someone could say that there is no point in me even attempting to disagree with the Meereenese Blot, since George R.R. Martin reportedly read and approved of these essays. And indeed, if we search for the entry about the Meereenese Blot on So Spake Martin, we see such a claim. Then he went on to add that sometimes there's an essay or even a series of essays that really gets it right. He specifically cited the difficulty he had with the Meereenese sections of A Dance with Dragons, trying to figure out the POV, and he called it the Meereenese Knot. He admitted being annoyed when someone turned it into the Meereenese Blot, but someone made a series of essays with that title. I read those when someone pointed them out to me, and I was really pleased with them because at least one guy got it. He got it completely. He knew exactly what I was trying to do there, and evidently I did it well enough for people who were paying attention. Of course, he added that some other essays depress him when people get everything wrong, and when people get everything wrong, well, whose fault is it? It could be his fault because he didn't write it well enough, but who knows? But it does not actually come from Martin himself, but from his associates, Elio and Linda. These are somewhat infamous figures in the fandom, with many people disliking them for various reasons. If you want to read more about the problems they caused, I recommend checking the article linked in the description. What matters here is that Elio and Linda have, on several occasions, disregarded the lore and the plot of this story that they are supposed to be experts of, completely contradicting George himself. For example, George R.R. Martin had, at some point, considered making the Valerians black. However, Linda was very outraged about House of the Dragon casting black actors in the roles of ethnic Valerians, believing this to be breaking the lore, even though, as an expert, she should know about George's original plans for the Valerians. So the fact that George's approval does not come from him directly, but from his associates that sometimes went against his words, is significant to me. Not to mention that George's approval does not mean that the case is closed, and no discussion, or even disagreement on the technicalities is allowed ever again. George personally said many things that are widely disregarded by the fandom. He explicitly confirmed 2 points of the story, King Bran and Stannis burning Shireen, but these are still met with staunch resistance from the fandom, and alternative endings are still proposed to this day. So why would this be any different, especially if the confirmation does not come from George directly? Not to mention that George always says that he is a gardener and he might have changed his mind on the issue already. Meereen is the least discussed plotline of this story precisely because the Meereenese Blot is considered the golden standard and no new thought is ever produced with regards to that storyline, which is deeply frustrating. Therefore, if people are allowed to propose alternate ending theories where Bran is not the king, I have a full right to disagree with this essay and its conclusions. First part of Feldman's essay analyzes the character of Skahaz kandaq. He is a Meereenese nobleman and a member of Dany's council, who shaved his head to symbolize rejecting Meereen's old ways and embracing new ones. Hence he is called Shavepate. While many nobles in Meereen shave their heads, Skahaz is the Shavepate. Skahaz creates a militia, brazen beasts, composed of fellow Shavepates and the freedmen, serving as a city watch in Meereen. Most of the Meereenese elite violently oppose Dany, so Skahaz's ardent support of her may appear suspicious and self-serving. Therefore, it's not difficult to imagine why Adam Feldman tried to search for more nefarious motivations in Skahaz's character. Namely, he argues that the assassination attempt at Dany on Daznak's pit was his doing, not hizdahr's. During the games in the pit, honey locusts are served to the guests. Dany refuses to eat them, even though hizdahr tries to persuade her to do so. Strong Belvas ends up eating them all and gets seriously sick. When Barristan tries to uncover the truth of these events, Skahaz insists that hizdahr was behind the assassination attempts on Dany. I have the poisoner. Who? Hizdahr's confectioner. His name would mean nothing to you. The man was just a cat's paw. The sons of the Harpy took his daughter and swore she would be returned unharmed once the queen was dead. Belvas and the dragon saved Daenerys. No one saved the girl. She was returned to her father in the Black of Night, in 9 pieces, 1 for every year she lived. According to Feldman, there is little evidence implicating hizdahr, and if he is the culprit, his actions make little sense. From except to little sense. The assertion that there is no evidence implicating hizdahr is a bit absurd. It's actually overwhelming, given that he was in charge of providing food and Skahaz already found the suspect of the actual deed. Sure, he may be a red herring, as is often the case, but to say that there is little evidence implicating hizdahr requires ignoring the context to which the situation happened. While the timing of the act indeed is quite bad, it's not for the reasons Feldman lists. Dany gave the Meereenese a good peace deal, with hizdahr as consort and the fighting pits open, and now he has constant access to Dany. So why would he murder her publicly rather than privately? From Dany had just to done in private. Indeed, Dany agreed to a peace deal that gives the Meereenese a lot of what they want, which in turn costs her a lot of sacrifices. In fact, when we weigh it, then we see that the supposed compromise actually benefits the Meereenese far more than it does Dany. She gives up part of her power to hizdahr, who has to witness people slaughtering each other in the fighting pits, and above all, is forced to accept that slavery will return to Yunkai and Astapor. That promise is not really much of a compromise. Appetite comes with eating. They got so much of what they wanted. Why not get everything they wanted, including their final goal? Dany's complete removal and return of slavery and their profits from the trade in human beings. Feldman quite rightfully points out that the Harpy is very strategic, else it would be impossible to start and stop the killing so quickly. So why would someone this well organized try to assassinate Dany so sloppily? It's also unknown how Dany's allies and her dragons would react, from the harpy has been shown to mention the dragons. That indeed makes little sense until you realize two things. One, the dragons are currently imprisoned, with only Drogon remaining free, and he has not been seen until his arrival at Daznak Pit, so it's safe to assume that they thought that he is gone forever, or at least out of Dany's control. 2. Meereen itself does not have an army, but Yunkai is actively sieging them. Karth declared war on Dany and is blockading the river, and like Skahaz says, Volantis and other slave cities launched their fleet against Dany. Who is to say that after Dany dies, they won't just open the gates and let the Slaver Coalition return the old order to the city? Another point Feldman makes is that if hizdahr knew about the locusts, he should ensure that only Dany eats them and have a backup plan in case she does not. From if hizdahr to be the case. But that is a non-issue to him. If Dany does not eat the locusts, she can easily be poisoned any other time. If any of Dany's people eat the locusts, then that's even better for him, because she becomes even more isolated. Feldman points out that if poison is used in the series, then usually the poisoner uses a red herring, and the true poisoner is revealed later. So in that case, hizdahr would be the red herring, since the evidence is just too good for it to be the case. From plus to is the patsy. Hizdahr is indeed the patsy, because Hizdahr himself did not poison the locusts. It was done by his confectioner, but he was merely a catspaw, like Skahaz says. The true poisoner was the harpy, that is, Galazza Galare, who is still not explicitly confirmed to be the harpy, nor even suspected by anyone. Sure, Hizdahr works closely with her and was involved in the whole ordeal, hence why he tried to convince Daenerys to eat the locusts. Like the confectioner, Hizdahr was merely a catspaw, and the true mastermind was Galazza, the harpy herself. The biggest evidence implicating her is the situation with her cousin Grazdan. Grazdan, she had been forewarned, was a cousin of the Green Grays, whose support she had found invaluable. The priestess was a voice for peace, acceptance, and obedience to lawful authority. I can give her cousin a respectful hearing, whatever he desires. What he desired turned out to be gold. Dany had refused to compensate any of the great masters for the value of their slaves, but the Meereenese kept devising other ways to squeeze coin from her. The noble Grazdan had once owned a slave woman who was a very fine weaver, it seemed. The fruits of her loom were greatly valued, not only in Meereen, but in New Geese and Astapor and Karth. When this woman had grown old, Grazdan had purchased 6 young girls and commanded the crown to instruct them in the secrets of her craft. The old woman was dead now. The young ones, freed, had opened a shop by the harbour wall to sell their weavings. Grazdan's galare asked that he be granted a portion of their earnings. They owe their skill to me, he insisted. I plucked them from the auction block and gave them to the room. Dany listened quietly, her face still. When he was done, she said, "What was the name of the old weaver? The slave?" Grazdan shifted his weight, frowning. "She was... Elsa, it might have been. Or Ella. It was 6 years ago she died. I have owned so many slaves, your grace. Let us say Elsa. Her is our ruling. From the girls, you shall have nothing. It was Elsa who taught them weaving, not you. From you, the girls shall have a new loom. The finest coin can buy. That is for forgetting the name of the old woman. What happens shortly afterwards? The freed women get slaughtered by the sons of the harpy. I shall pray and make sacrifice. Perhaps the gods of geese will hear me." Galazza Galare sipped her wine, but her eyes did not leave Dany. Storms raged within the walls as well as without. More freedmen died last night, or so I have been told. 3. Saying it left a bitter taste in her mouth. The cowards broke in on some weavers, freed women who had done no harm to anyone. All they did was make beautiful things. I have a tapestry they gave me hanging over my bed. The sons of the harpy broke their loom and raped them before slitting their throats. Awfully convenient timing of this specific murder. This shows how insidious the harpy is. To Dany, she presents a mask of a kindly grandma ready to guide her, but her true nature is sinister, for she ordered those brutal deaths for the crime of her cousin not getting compensated. Hizdahr is a patsy. Galazza's patsy. It's not a secret that Adam Feldman believes Skahaz to be the culprit of the poisoning, since he lost the most from the deal and may do something desperate. He is also the one who implicates Hizdahr and presents Barristan with the evidence against him. He comes across as an opportunist, and Skahaz's family is seen as inferior to Hizdahr, with them having bad blood with one another. From Let's Look for Another to Families in the Past. The argument that Skahaz supports Dany out of his own ambition is not entirely baseless. He definitely had something to gain from this, but there is no reason to believe that his devotion to Dany's new order is completely false either. These things do not cancel each other out. Skahaz can both hate slavery and be a social climber. It's not unheard of to hear about class traitors joining the revolution against their own interests. Feldman points out that Skahaz wants to sabotage any peace and wants to kill the nobles and the child hostages as a display of power, which works to his advantage. Dany refuses and Skahaz is fired when she marries Hizdahr. From throughout ADWD to peace is agreed to. Dany is indeed the sole guarantee of Skahaz remaining in power, as demonstrated by the fact that Hizdahr removed him right after he became king consort. But Skahaz was not removed because a peace was made in the first place. He was removed because Dany was losing her power and gave away a lot of it to Hizdahr. Skahaz's removal is something she could overrule. She is quite literally giving up. Will you hold court today? No. On the morrow I will be a woman wed, and Hizdahr will be king. Let him hold court. These are his people. Some are his, some are yours. The ones you freed. Are you chiding me? The ones you call your children. They want their mother. You are chiding me. Only a little, bright heart. Will you come hold court? After my wedding, perhaps. After the peace. This after that you speak of never comes. You should hold court. And Hizdahr removes Skahaz not because the peace was made or because he was incompetent, but because there is bad blood between their houses and he finally had an opportunity to remove him from Dany's presence. He must have known that his entire gimmick was to direct Dany towards more violent course of action. Removing him is a very strategic move. Hizdahr's goal is not to keep the peace, but to lull Dany into a false sense of security, take power for the slavers on behalf of the Harpy, and then remove her, opening the gates to the slaver coalition and reinstalling slavery both in Meereen and in the rest of Slavers' Bay. According to Feldman, Shavepate has a motive and poison achieves his goals by sowing mistrust, much like Littlefinger, and whoever eats the locusts, Shavepate can use it to his advantage, from so Shavepate to his advantage. Let us for a moment imagine that Dany dies. In that case, what's going to happen to Skahaz? As Feldman himself agrees, he is seen as a collaborator with the enemy and the rest of the nobles hate him. Skahaz being the one to poison the locusts would be an idiotic move that would endanger him and his family greatly. The Harpy is incredibly savage. They rape and mutilate the freedmen any chance they get. So how would they punish Skahaz and his family when he no longer has any protection from Dany? So long as Dany is alive, or at least assumed alive by some, Skahaz cannot be hurt. But once she's gone for sure, then nothing and no one protects him and his family. It's not like Barristan cannot verify who Hizdahr's confectioner is and if his daughter was indeed butchered. Actually, he does that and gets a confirmation. From finally to seemed to her. But Feldman just completely disregards it, claiming that the confectioner's confession cannot be trusted, because Skahaz's torture does not bring out any reliable information. Except Barristan specifically asks to meet with the confectioner alone, precisely to verify whether Skahaz is even saying the truth. And Barristan does not blindly trust Skahaz, contrary to what Feldman insinuates. What of Hizdahr? He is still her consort, her king, her husband, her poisoner. Is he? Where is your proof? The crown he wears is proof enough. The throne he sits. Open your eyes, old man. This is all he needed from Daenerys, all he ever wanted. Once he had it, why share the rule? Why indeed? It had been so hot in the pit. He could still see the air shimmering above the scarlet sands, smell the blood spilling from the men who died for their amusement. And he could still hear Hizdahr urging his queen to try the honeyed locusts. Those are very tasty, sweet and hot. Yet he never touched so much as one himself. Selmy rubbed his temple. I swore no vows to Hizdahr's loraq, and if I had, he has cast me aside, just as Joffrey did. This confectioner, I want to question him myself. Alone. Is it that way? The Shavepate crossed his arms against his chest. Don't then. Question him as you like. If what he has to say convinces me, if I join with you in this, I would require your word that no harm would come to Hizdahr's loraq unless it can be proved that he had some part in this. Why do you care so much for Hizdahr, old man? If he is not the Harpy, he is the Harpy's firstborn son. All I know for certain is that he is the queen's consort. I want your word on this, or I swear I shall oppose you. Skahaz's smile was savage. My word then, no harm to Hizdahr till his guilt is proved. But when we have the proof, I mean to kill him with my own hands. I want to pull his entrails out and show them to him before I let him die. Again, it's not Skahaz who questions the confectioner, but Barristan himself. So the comment about skahaz getting false confessions out of people does not apply here either. And it's not something that's specific to skahaz, it's just that torture is overall a very bad method of obtaining information, since people in serious distress would say anything to just stop it. We have several such examples, Cersei and the Blue Bard, as well as Aerys torturing his mistress and her family. Dany herself realizes it, and that's why she puts a stop to the torture. But she's rarely given credit for it. The confectioner is questioned by Barristan off-screen and skahaz is not present. Thus Barristan can verify the truth. The confectioner is not a nobleman. He is no son of the Harpy. All he knows is that hizdahr ordered him to poison the locusts. He does not know on whose behalf. He does not know who is the true mastermind behind it all. Nobody lied, but nobody told the truth either, and thus the true mastermind was not yet uncovered. But hizdahr was absolutely involved in this plan. This may come across as naive, but I think that skahaz truly believes in Dany. While he probably isn't entirely selfless, who in that world is? The bad blood between him and hizdahr could have numerous reasons. Maybe the Kandaq family's modesty is because they truly are abolitionists. Nonetheless, if we assume that skahaz was the one to poison the locusts, then the reasons for him doing that are certainly not due to his own ambitions and wishes to elevate himself. In fact, if he was the one responsible, then he did this out of commitment for the revolution. If he poisoned Dany, then he believed that she no longer intended to carry on with that revolution, and decided to take matters into his own hands. Next, Feldman insinuates that the Shavepate played barristan just like Littlefinger played Ned. Read the entire excerpt from As I Mentioned to Over His Head. Skahaz admits that the peace was not a sham at first, and gives his reasoning. Because the slavers feared Dany. The Harpy needed to try Dany out and see how far she is willing to go for the sake of peace. So, at least at first, they made some true concessions. But that does not make their actions 100% genuine. The Harpy never approached those negotiations from a place of honesty. The Meereenese nobles were biding their time and testing Dany, saying that she is more dedicated to making peace than to going to war, thus making her look weak and easy to manipulate in their eyes. This is why he urged her to be more violent. And correctly. Skahaz is not playing barristan like Littlefinger played Ned. Quite the opposite. They play on the same team and ultimately have the same, or at least aligned goals. Definite end of slavery in Meereen. For Skahaz because that ensures he stays in power and his vision comes true. For Barristan because it means they can return to Westeros. Implicating Skahaz for the poisoning has a clear reason in Feldman's eyes. To argue that the Harpy never betrayed Dany nor tried to break the peace, contrary to what we are led to believe during those 10 long chapters in A Dance with Dragons, and that Dany, by betraying that peace, will be the good guy choosing to discard the real peace away and instead bring war, from one final implication to the rest of Dany's plotline. It's interesting that it's Galazza who says that hizdahr would never soil his hands with poison, considering that she was the one to do it. What she's doing here is trying to cast suspicion away from hizdahr so that she can continue to control the situation. She is a religious figure and can't exactly become a queen herself, so the only way to have her ally in power is for hizdahr to remain Dany's consort. In fact, the Shavepate being the one to poison the locusts would be very convenient for Galazza, since Skahaz is her mortal enemy. If Barristan somehow uncovers that it was Skahaz, then he is executed for attempted regicide and she has one enemy less. Why is Galazza so certain that it was not hizdahr? Because it was actually her. She was the one to devise this entire plan, and hizdahr and the confectioner were merely pawns in that scheme. The Meereenese Blot essays strangely do not address one crucial aspect of the entire story, one that outside of these essays is perhaps its most discussed aspect. Who exactly is the Harpy? I am 100% certain that it's Galazza, and the case of Gradan and the Weaver women already implicates her. It's also worth noting that harpies are female, and going back to poison, in universe it is considered a woman's weapon. Going back to Barristan, Feldman insinuates that Barristan breaking the peace was, ultimately, a wrong move. This assertion has wide-spanning implications for his entire character. Barristan's arc deals with the obvious contradiction of being a member of the King's Guard. He swore to protect his king, but that entails standing idly as his liege commits atrocities. He did his duty. Some night, Sir Barristan wondered if he had not done that duty too well. He had sworn his vows before the eyes of gods and men. He could not in honor go against them, but the keeping of those vows had grown hard in the last years of King Aerys' reign. He had seen things that it pained him to recall, and more than once he wondered how much of the blood was on his own hands. If he had not gone to Duskendale to rescue Aerys from Lord Darklynn's dungeons, The king might have died there as Tywin Lannister sacked the town. Then Prince Rhaegar would have ascended the Iron Throne, mayhaps to heal the realm. Duskendale had been his finest hour, yet the memory tasted bitter on his tongue. Barristan was present when Aerys was burning people alive. He also, to some extent, regrets saving him from his captivity at Duskendale. He did what was expected of him, acted honorably, and could not have had foreknowledge of what exactly Aerys would become. And yet that memory is bitter. We also know that the Kingsguard members were acutely aware of what Aerys did to Rhaella. Relationship between Aerys and his queen had been strained during the last years of his reign. They slept apart and did their best to avoid each other during the waking hours. But whenever Aerys gave a man to the flames, Queen Rhaella would have a visitor in the night. The day he burned his mace and dagger hand, Jaime and Jon Darry had stood at guard outside her bedchambers, whilst the king took his pleasure. "You're hurting me," they had heard Rhaella cry through the oaken door. "You're hurting me." In some queer way, that had been worse than Lord Chestell's screaming. "We are sworn to protect her as well," Jaime had finally been driven to say. "We are," Darry allowed, "but not from him." Barristan also reflects on how he served people who ultimately did not deserve it, and how with Dany he found renewed purpose, someone who finally deserved it. "So I am a coin in the hands of some god. Is that what you are saying, sir?" "No," Sir Barristan replied. "You are the trueborn heir of Westeros. To the end of my days I shall remain your faithful knight, should you find me worthy to bear a sword again. If not, I am content to serve strong Belvas as his squire." "What if I decide you are only worthy to be my fool?" Dany asked scornfully. "Or perhaps my cook?" "I will be honored, your grace," Selmy said with quiet dignity. "I can bake apples and boil beef as well as any man, and I've roasted many a duck over a campfire. I hope you like them greasy, with charred skin and bloody bones." It was his failures that haunted him at night, though. Jaehaerys, Aerys, Robert, 3 dead kings, Rhaegar, who would have been a finer king than any of them, Princess Elia and the children, Aegon just a babe, Rhaenys with her kitten. Dead, everyone, yet he still lived, who had sworn to protect them. And now Daenerys, his bright shining child queen. She is not dead, I will not believe it. So if it was Skahaz who poisoned the locust, hizdahr was imprisoned unfairly, and the peace was real, the implication here is that Barristan should have once more stood idly and do nothing. Is he meant to be vindicated in his past decisions, to not act in the face of injustices that he faced? Was Barristan once again fooled? Has he misjudged Dany and served her even though she did not ultimately deserve it? Or maybe Barristan's actions were right, because the peace was not real. Feldman's argument, perhaps even key argument in the essay, is that the peace in Meereen was real. There are the usual appeals to how we were secretly tricked by George and to unreliable narration, but the overall conclusion is that Dany's actions in Meereen were, ultimately, moral, admirable, and effective, and that her rule was heading towards success until Drogon destroyed everything. And that, most crucially, the Harpy was not trying to sabotage the peace. Read the long excerpt from Many Readers So Dislike to Foolish and Doomed. Before we dive into the question whether the peace in Meereen was real, we must ask ourselves another one. How do we even define peace? In a way, the situation in Meereen, and Meereen alone, it must be highlighted, before Drogon's arrival, was something of an improvement. Slavery remained prohibited within its walls. The nightly slaughter of the freedmen and unsullied ended. The Meereenese elite got something they wanted, their man in a position of power, and reopening of the fighting pits. Though even in that matter, there are several cracks that I will discuss later. In that sense, a peace, as in a compromise between two warring sides, was indeed reached. Everyone got something they wanted, and everyone was forced to make some concessions. These efforts were not completely in vain either. They taught Dany how to actually rule, in spite of some people insisting that she has no experience in that area, doesn't know how to rule, will not be able to rule Westeros, and so on. Dany passes taxes, holds court, has to deal with feeding her people, makes trade deals, manages a refugee crisis and a plague, brokers alliances, negotiates, compromises, inspires her people, tries to bring unity between former enemies, learns how to differentiate between good and bad advice, and who is trustworthy and who is not. She does all of this while all of the powerful people in the continent are waging a war against her, and she has a guerrilla war going on in her own city. And have I mentioned that This girl did not even have a formal education. All of these skills would be useful if she took the throne, or if she had to deal with an existential threat. She certainly has more experience in ruling than any other character in this story, including those who are pointed out as best possible candidates for ruling. But because so many fans simply want her dead, they must completely disregard that ruling arc and claim it to be completely pointless in the grand scheme of things. Of course, I'm not insinuating that Feldman thinks that, but many of the people who point to the Meereenese Blot as their justification for Dany's downfall do. Skahaz not being the one to poison the locusts is so crucial because if it was him, then Barristan had no right to break the peace, and he made a mistake doing so. But we already established that Skahaz poisoning Daenerys means he is a dead man, either butchered by Dany's supporters or the Harpy. It also means that Barristan should have once more stood idly and do nothing in the face of injustices. The Harpy biding her time and making a sloppy move makes infinitely more sense in that case. Given what happened in Meereen, it's borderline impossible for the Harpy to ever approach Dany with any honest intentions, no matter how badly Dany wants to appease her. Nothing but Dany's departure and reintroduction of slavery will satisfy her, but Feldman argues precisely otherwise, that Dany actually won over the Harpy. He gives us several key characteristics of how the Harpy operates and mentions that, according to him, she can be dealt with if her demands are met. Read his arguments, from what do we know about the Harpy to adequately addressed. I think precisely the opposite. To me, the Harpy is quite literally a domestic terrorist. The freedmen did not hurt anyone. They're completely innocent, and their only sin is that they were released from slavery. The Harpy punishes them precisely for that, and not to force Dany into the negotiation table, but to resist her new order in the city. Feldman does mention that Galazza might be the Harpy, but does not build upon it. That is because him admitting to Galazza being the Harpy would immediately undermine any point he tries to make. If Galazza ordered horrific things such as the murder of Stalwart Shield and the murder and rape of the Weavers, then suddenly her talking about peace would immediately appear absurd and dishonest. The assumption that the sons of the Harpy use these murders to express their dissatisfaction and that they shall stop once their interests are adequately addressed would imply that torturing and raping innocent people is an appropriate way to make certain demands about your interests. Which is weird, to say the least. People do not engage in rape, mutilation, and torture because they are dissatisfied. They use it as a terror tactic, as punishment. While violence is often means to resist occupation, it is always a very tactical sort of violence, and never the senseless slaughter that the sons of the Harpy engage in. Resistance leaders should actually condemn them rather than orchestrate them from above. Next, Adam Feldman discusses Harpy's motivations, and that they mostly resist Dany for reasons of vengeance, but also that they operate on the sense of urgency due to external threats. Read, from What are the Harpy's motivations to The list is long, my queen. This would be true if Dany just waltzed into Meereen, classified those 163 people, and proclaimed herself queen afterwards, out of imperialist interests. But contrary to arguments used by some bright minds of our generation, this is not what happened. Dany conquers Astapor and then Yunkai and marches towards Meereen. Upon hearing this, the slavers disembowel and crucify 163 children solely to taunt her. The only reason why they did that was because they knew she was coming to the city with the intent to end slavery. This was their first act of resistance against that. And surely enough, they must have hardened against Dany when she punished them in the same exact manner as they punished the children. Something that, by the way, is rarely mentioned whenever that subject is discussed. A common talking point about Dany's upcoming turn to madness is that she crucified 163 people, but rarely if ever it is mentioned why that happened. And that is because if it was added that it was a retaliatory act of violence against defenseless and slave kids, suddenly it would not sound as convincing. This fact alone means that the Meereenese do not resist Dany because she's a foreign bitch conqueror, but because of what motivates her. She destroyed their source of income, their comfortable way of life, and so on. By staying in Meereen and ruling it as a queen conqueror, she clearly contradicts the assertion that the Meereenese believed that she wished to butcher them all, yet that does not stop them in the slightest. Quite the opposite, the killings only get worse and more brutal with each night. The violent insurgency is indeed there partly as revenge for their killed relatives, but mostly there to show their opposition to Dany merely existing in their city and not letting them live how they lived before. Hizdahr's warning is not unreasonable. We see similar sentiments in other places in Essos. The girl's true sin cannot be denied. This arrogant child has taken it upon herself to smash the slave trade, but that traffic was never confined to Slaver's Bay. It was part of the sea of trade that spanned the world, and the Dragon Queen has clouded the water. Karth goes to war against Meereen because of Dany ending slave trade in Slaver's Bay alone, even though she did not personally hurt them. This proves that the revolution is no longer in that specific place. The slaves are preparing to rebel in many different cities. We know that other slave cities do join the coalition to take Dany down. So in that case, who are the masters in Meereen more likely to side with? The foreign bitch conqueror who butchered their people, or all other slave masters in the world? It's very clear that the elite of Meereen would try to negotiate and ally with all other elites. Perhaps initial negotiations of this sort were made secretly when Xaro arrived in the city. This is why the Meereenese have a sense of urgency. If Dany stays in Meereen, she is going to take the coalition in open battle. But if she's removed, then there is likely no battle and it's far easier to surrender to the upcoming coalition. As that happens, the old order is restored, the freedmen are re-enslaved, and the dragons are still chained, meaning that they can reasonably be killed. We have a precedent of killing chained dragons after all. Both Hizdahr and the Green Grays talk about Dany in the past tense, believing her to be dead. Could it be that this is what they hope for? If Dany indeed was dead, all they need to do is wait for the coalition. But she survived, and will return to Meereen, in spite of popular predictions that she will leave the freedmen to their fates, just like that, and go west. Next, Adam Feldman discusses how Dany's behavior changed ever since she took the city, and how that affected Harpy's perception of her. From, but perhaps to, someone they could work with. The reasoning here is broadly true. The Harpy realized that Daenerys can be dealt with. But I find it hard to believe that they changed their minds because they realized that she isn't so bad after all. Dany killed their family members. That is not something that can be forgiven by her showing mercy to their children. In fact, Dany chaining her dragons and not doing anything to the child hostages was perceived as her weakness, and the Harpy decided to exploit it. It's naive to assume that the Harpy entered negotiations in good faith. I mean, they are still butchering innocent people in unusually cruel ways. It's significant that it's Galazza who says this. Quite literally, the murder of the Weavers was her revenge for her cousin not being compensated. It seems like final proof to Galazza that she is not dealing with a conqueror, but with a little girl. There's also the matter of Galazza being so insistent on Dany taking a husband. With Hizdahr as consort, the interests of the nobles are represented, and not in a good way. In fact, Dany loses a lot of her power once Hizdahr becomes king. The first thing he does is remove some of her people from her council and give posts to those loyal to him. The Harpy's man in the possession of power already does a lot to undermine Dany's grip on the city. Who is to say that Hizdahr wouldn't force Dany to keep making more and more concessions as time passes? Who is to say he won't try to remove her while waiting for the slaver coalition? Next, Feldman gives further arguments why he believes that the peace is real, albeit fragile. That they reached a compromise that nobody was truly happy with, but that such is the nature of compromise. And that, assuming that the locusts was Skahaz's doing, the Harpy never intentionally sabotaged it. Barristan did. Read from So Dany Agrees to, and Barristan's Q. Slavery remains banned in Meereen because there are still people who can enforce the ban, not because the Harpy is so honorable and intends to keep the peace. She simply cannot re-enslave anyone, at least not yet. She will be able to when the slaver coalition arrives. When you think about it, the reality is that the peace in Meereen comes with far more setbacks for Dany's cause than for the Meereenese. Meereen is not the only slave city. It all started in Astapor, and Astapor is set to remain a slave city as part of the peace. That is already a huge blow. The Meereenese can no longer trade in slaves, but their friends and everyone else can, so the true victory here is for the slaving class. Dany also has to reopen the fighting pits, and as already established, it's not necessarily true that only the freedmen can fight there, which seems like a significant hint that there's something wrong with that peace. Dany also has to sacrifice a lot personally, for example ending the first non-abusive relationship she's had, and marry someone she neither loves nor likes, and who does not love her back either. And Feldman agrees that the Harpy can just break the peace at any moment. So is that peace genuine or not? Because if the Harpy can change her mind any second for no reason at all, it seems way too fragile for it to be the case. If you think about it, true peace is rarely, if ever, achieved between two equal parties. Usually, one side is forced into the negotiating table after losing and having no reason to fight anymore. For example, during World War II, the Nazis only truly surrendered when the Soviets literally arrived at their doorstep. So in order to achieve a true, lasting, and stable peace, one side has to be decisively defeated. When one side has overwhelming power but is not willing to use it, the opposing side will exploit it and force them into concessions that are more advantageous to themselves and not to them. The Harpy was able to exploit what they perceived as a weakness, with Dany making a mistake of assuming that Galazza is just a nice grandma trying to do the right thing. Next, Feldman discusses the details of the pieces Dany made, first in Meereen and second in Yunkai, insisting that both of those were true pieces, and pointing to the character of Jurkas Zojuznak as proof of his reasoning. From Dany agreed to 2 pieces to launching of the Volantin fleet. And why did the Yunkai suddenly become so brave as to no longer fear Dany? We already established it. They realized that she chained her dragons and that reinforcements are on their way. Dany is gone and assumed dead by most, and Meereen and Yunkai both likely plan to ally with the Volantin and the rest, put an end to the rebellion and reinstall slavery in Meereen and elsewhere. And was Jurkas truly so noble that he would be willing to keep the peace, even if he heard that Volantis is on its way? Maybe, but most of the rest of Yunkai would not be willing to do that, as established later in the story. With Dany still in the city, the Yunkai could have shrugged off Meereen's new status as a free city, but that comes with loss for them. That's one less market for them, and means loss of profits. But now the Yunkai want to break the peace, and probably would anyway, with or without Dany. Next, Feldman gives us quick spark notes on Yunkai and its goals, as well as the developments that happen among them. That they feared facing Dany in open battle due to their lack of military prowess, wanted hizdahr to be the one to guarantee the peace, and that they did not want to break it either until the death of Jurkas, after which there are still some who want to honor that peace, though they are in a minority. Read from I wouldn't merely to sought a peace and reached it. The passage mentioned by Feldman literally spells out that the Yunkai never intended to honor the peace, outside of some minor examples, such as Yazan and Jurkas. Now both are dead. If the peace lingered upon the lives of 2 people, then it was truly even more fragile than we expected. Who is to say that the Yunkai would not have planned a mutiny against them? It seems to me like these guys simply waited for a pretext to break the peace, and would have found it even if Yazan and Jurkas lived, especially once they learned that the Volantin reinforcements were on their way. Who are they most likely to side with? They won't stay neutral, that's for sure, for if they did, Dany could win, and they would lose Meereen for good. It is in their interest to back the Volantin, and they fully intend to. Later, Feldman insists that maybe if Jurkas knew that the Volantin fleet is coming, he would have perhaps seen a peace differently, but there's no evidence he did. And that, perhaps, there existed a way for Dany and hizdahr to negotiate peace with Volantis as well. From was war with the Yunkish to fleet to face Dragonfire after all. So Feldman agrees that if Jurkas knew about the upcoming Volantin reinforcements, he likely would have broken the peace anyway. Thus the peace would have inevitably been broken. Thus, it was not real at any point. This also proves that just the peace in Meereen would not have solved anything, because the revolt is continent-wide. The Volantin are still under the impression that Dany won't use dragons, and right now Dany is not in the city, is assumed dead, and the dragons are still locked up. Before his imprisonment, hizdahr is seemingly keeping the peace. Why is that? Because he too bides his time until Volantis arrives. He cannot openly break the peace right now because Dany's forces remain in the city, but once the Volantin are outside the gates as well, that becomes another matter. hizdahr opens the gates and lets them in. They enslave everyone back. End of story. And it's literally impossible for Dany and hizdahr to negotiate peace with Volantis, because Volantis attacks Meereen not because they were not allowed to trade in slaves. Volantis still does that. They attack Dany because her mere existence and her actions in Slavers Bay are an affront to them and sparked a revolution that they so fear. This arrogant child has taken it upon herself to smash the slave trade. But that traffic was never confined to Slavers Bay. It was part of the sea of trade that spanned the world, and the Dragon Queen has clouded the water. Behind the black wall, lords of ancient blood sleep pearly, listening as their kitchen slaves sharpen their long knives. Slaves grow our food, clean our streets, teach our young. They guard our walls, row our galleys, fight our battles. And now when they look east, they see this young queen shining from afar, this breaker of chains. The old blood cannot suffer that. Poor men hate her too. Even the vilest beggar stands higher than a slave. This dragon queen would rob him of that consolation. Dany literally does not know that the slaves in Volantis are planning a revolt, and that she inspired it. Hell, she does not know that the Red Priests in Volantis proclaim her as Azor Ahai. She does not even know what Azor Ahai is. Volantis cannot make peace with Dany on condition that she allows them to trade in slaves, because it's not why they attacked in the first place. They need to kill Dany and re-enslave those she freed to make an example and quell a revolution. Lastly, Feldman notes that both the Harpy and the Yunkish are not as one-dimensional as they are made to seem. From "so" for both the Harpy to "disaster at the fighting pits." So what is the truth? First, we are told that Yunkai broke the peace because of Hizdahr's removal from power. Now we are told that Yunkai broke the peace because of what happened at the pits. Why not break it right after the pits then? Why wait for Hizdahr's removal from power? Could it be that Yunkai broke the peace because Hizdahr was not in power and it would not be possible to ally together against Dany's forces, since now Barristan is regent? Remember, the marriage between Hizdahr and Dany was one of the conditions for peace precisely because they needed Hizdahr with a share of power. And once again, Barristan breaking the peace was precisely the right decision, even if somehow it was true that Skahaz poisoned the locusts. The peace would have been broken even if Yezan and Yurkas survived. For the moment Volantis launches its fleet, it's over, and Yunkai definitely will side with Volantis. A peace that fragile is not real. It never could be real. A peace where slavery is still allowed was not real peace in the first place. So far we have only covered 2 parts of these essays, and there's 5 in total. The script in Google Doc is literally 62 pages long, so it must be split. The first conclusions I have from these 2 parts. We are already in the "these slavers had a point" territory, with an implication that the peace that was supposedly mutually beneficial should have remained in place and Barristan was wrong to act. But how exactly is this peace mutually beneficial? Because as far as I can tell, the peace gives overwhelming benefits to the slavers, while giving Dany very little advantages. The Yunkai want to trade in slaves, and they will be allowed to, while Dany still struggles to make anything work. This peace was far more beneficial to the slavers than to Dany, and they still fully intended to break it. Because to them it's all or nothing. Either slavery is allowed everywhere, or they take a front. And remember, the Volantene do not attack Dany because she does not allow them to trade in slaves. Dany does not even know that Volantis plans to attack, nor does she know that she became an icon there, and that the slaves themselves plan a revolt there. Even if that peace magically was real, there was no way for it to last, since Volantis was about to crash it. And when push came to shove, of course Yunkai would side with Volantis rather than with Dany. Part 2 drops next week, and I will probably manage to wrap it up. For now, thanks for watching. Remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video.